CYC is a free channel, presents the Word of God for everyone. Your support will help us to continue the mission. Visit our website, cycnow.com. Even $1 will make a difference.
Well, welcome to our next session on creation and evolution. And I'm here with my guests Monica and Rogi and Miriam and Tadros. Why don't you tell us where you're from?
I'm from the Church of St. Mary and St. Athanasius in Mississauga.
I'm from St. Philip here in Guelph.
St. Mary and St. Athanasius from Mississauga.
I'm from St. Philip here in Guelph as well.
Wonderful. Well, welcome and thanks for joining us today. My name's Don Waller and I'm going to be your host for this session. And we're talking about evolution and creation, and today especially we're talking about how does the Bible compare with science. So we're looking at Genesis chapter 1 and comparing that with what scientists tell us about the creation of the universe and of our planet Earth. I'm a volunteer apologist with an organization called Reasons to Believe, where we focus on integrating science and faith issues. So in the previous sessions we were looking at I think we're up to day 3 now in terms of creation, the creation events, and we saw where God brought land together, and we talked a little bit about plate tectonics and the movement of the Earth's crust and why that was important for life, any kind of life, especially advanced life. And so when we compare that with what science tells us, there's a third agreement, and that is that Genesis and nature's record agree that the next major event in the creation of Earth was the formation of land surrounded by water. So this of course, sets the stage for the next thing. So let's look at that now. So not surprisingly, anybody got a guess of what came next? Yeah? No, you'd be cheating, I guess. Well, the next thing that happened, of course, was land plants. We see plants now being talked about. So let's read from Genesis verse 11, chapter 1, verse 11. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it according to their various kinds." And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seeds according to their kinds, and trees bearing their fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the third day. So again, when we look at this, the Hebrew word that's used there was not bara. It's not about something new happening. It's about something appearing that was already there. So now we have carbon dioxide and water with land and light. We have plants that have been confined originally to the surface of the waters that are now starting to be established on land. And this period started about 3 billion years ago with very primitive organisms called algae. Okay, I'm sure you've all heard of algae. Don't put any chlorine in your pool for a few days and you'll know what algae is. And it continued on with ferns and some other ancient plant life that we can all see in the fossil record. And all of these plants on land and in the water are going to dramatically change planet Earth. They're necessary to change planet Earth. Anybody want to take a guess as to why? Why would God put plants on the Earth at this point in time? Any guesses?
Oxygen. Produce oxygen. Yeah.
Absolutely, to produce oxygen. Why do you need oxygen? You need oxygen for advanced life, right? So you have to have a stable atmosphere, you have to have a water cycle, all the things that we talked about in previous sessions, and you have to have oxygen. And so God puts plants on the earth to do that. Genesis and science agree that plant life on land was the next significant event in the development of this young earth. Okay, now we're on day 4. And we have something very exciting. The appearance of the sun, the moon, and the stars. Okay, let's read together from verse 14. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark seasons and days and years. And let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth." And it was so. Now, if you've been paying attention up until now, this will strike you as quite odd. So God created the heavens and the earth. Then he talks about, what did we talk about? Light, right? He says light was created. Well, where did the light come from? Stars. and the sun. Okay? But here he is in day 4 saying that he's creating the sun. Does that not strike you a bit odd? Well, it's important to look at the Hebrew word for when he says, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky. The Hebrew word there, again, is not bara. It's not something brand new, but it's the word haya, which means let it be seen, let it appear. Okay? So it was always there, because when God created the universe, he created the stars and he created the sun, but it wasn't able to be seen from our perspective on planet Earth because of this dense atmosphere that we talked about. Well, now in day 4, the plants are starting to do something very exciting, and that is they're starting to transform the atmosphere of the Earth so that the sun now appears. And we're going to see that as we go through the next set here. Let's look at a few more verses. Verse 16, God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and morning, the 4th day. So the Hebrew word here tells us that the lights were caused to appear. Okay? Genesis tells us that when the sun and the moon and the stars appeared visibly to an observer on planet Earth, this was the first time it could be seen. He also explained why they were created. Why was it necessary for the light to be able to be seen on planet Earth? And let's look now at the record of nature and see what science has to say about all this. So, scientists tell us that about 2 billion years ago, the atmosphere, which was this thick and dark sort of atmosphere, for many reasons, it began to thin out even more. And this translucent sky that had existed, remember we talked about how it became more and more translucent, so you could kind of see, you couldn't see the sun per se, but you knew that there was light. All of a sudden, not all of a sudden, this took a long time, but the atmosphere was transformed from being translucent to being fully transparent, the atmosphere that we have now. So now what happens, because we have this transparent atmosphere, the sun, the moon, and the stars, which had been there for a long time, now make their first appearance on the surface of planet Earth. You with me so far? Okay, so this is one of the common questions that people have. You know, someone who's got a little bit of science understanding and may not believe the Bible will come to you and say, well, the Bible's ridiculous. How can you have, you know, creation of the heavens in verse 1 and then you have light, but then God only creates the sun and the moon and the stars later? How can that be? The order's all wrong. But this is where the importance of establishing your frame of reference comes in. If you're an observer on the earth looking out through this dense atmosphere, it makes perfect sense. In fact, it's exactly the way it would have been. But if you're on the outside looking down, of course, it would make no sense. And that's why, according to the scientific method, it's important to establish your frame of reference before you do any other testing. Okay, so what do we have? We have Genesis and the record of nature agreeing that the clearing of the atmosphere on the primordial earth came after plant life was established on land, and the skies played a very important role in establishing clocks for life. You all know that you've got to have some kind of normal rotation in order to have life on planet Earth. Okay, so then what happened? About 1 billion to 500 million years ago, our planet had the following things. An atmosphere which included about 20% oxygen. It had an established water cycle. It had stable land masses. They weren't heaving and bucking and belching up lava all over the place. They had plants. It had protection from ultraviolet lights provided by a new ozone layer, and visible sun, moon, and stars for bioclocks. Okay? So now the stage was set for the introduction of the next creative event that God did. Anybody want to guess? No? No guesses. All right. Okay, well, we're going to talk about animals. All right? God creates some animals now. Let's look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 20, and read together. And God said, let the water teem with living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky. So God created the great creatures of the sea and every living and moving thing with which the water teems according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth. And there was evening and morning, the fifth day, the fifth yom, the fifth period of God's creating. So here, God creates a whole bunch of different kinds of creatures, and we're not going to go into detail on them, but basically he created animals that had the capability of having what we call soulish attributes. They had a mind, a will, and evidently some emotions. How many of you have a pet? Yeah? I have a pet beagle. And let me tell you something. She's absolutely got a mind of her own. She has a will, which rarely is in line with my will. And she has emotions. When she gets up in the morning, the first thing she wants to do is come running up the stairs and greet everybody and lick them to death. She loves to do that. Other times, you can tell she's tired and she's sad and she's a little bit grumpy and she doesn't want to be bugged. It's amazing, right? And what's really neat about these kinds of creatures is that God created them so that we could have a relationship with them to some extent. Not the same as the relationship we have with each other as human beings, but we can have a relationship with animals. And I think that's pretty neat. Now, here's something I want to draw out for you. This is the first time that bara has been used since verse 1. Remember we talked about the Hebrew word bara, which means the creation of something absolutely brand new. Not made out of something else, but brand new, brought into existence. Boom. This is the first time in the Genesis record where God uses the word bara in the Scripture. So something brand new is being created here when he talks about the animals. Okay? All right. So I want to introduce this idea, and then we're going to pick it up again in the next session. About 543 million years ago, there was a sudden and dramatic increase in the number of animal kinds on Earth. And it was so big that it was written up in Time magazine. There's a picture of it there for you to see, and it was called Evolution's Big Bang. Okay? And it's known as the Cambrian Explosion. And it saw the introduction of about 500 million new species of life. The majority of them were sea creatures. Okay? And this happened in a space of time that was very, very small compared to the timelines that we've been looking at up until now. I'll just read to you a quote from Time magazine. It says here, then, 543 million years ago, in the early Cambrian, within the span of no more than 10 million years, creatures with teeth and tentacles and claws and jaws materialized with the suddenness of apparitions. In a burst of creativity like nothing before or since, nature appears to have sketched out the blueprints for virtually the whole of the animal kingdom. This explosion of biological diversity is described by scientists as biology's Big Bang. Okay. So we see marine invertebrates that appear early on. Various fish show up about 400 million years ago. Birds show up about 50 to 100 million years ago, along with marine animals. Some big marine animals and some smaller ones. So if we look at Genesis and we look at science, it seems that they agree that there was this sudden burst of animal life on planet Earth. So why don't we just pause there for a bit, and I'll take a question or two, and then we'll pick this up again in our next session. So anybody have a question that's burning?
What I want to ask, okay, so you said that there was light, and then they had like the plants, and then the sun and the moon, they appeared.
Right.
Right? But was the light beforehand, was that visible from the Earth?
It was translucent. So remember, plants can grow just fine, thank you, as long as they have enough sunlight coming through the atmosphere. It doesn't have to be transparent. The plants actually played a role working with the sun as they received the light to transform the atmosphere, because they ate up a lot of the carbon dioxide and produced oxygen, right? So between the sun and the plants, they basically caused, over a long period of time, the clearing of Earth's primitive atmosphere from this translucent beginning to a transparent atmosphere such as we have today. And it had to happen, incidentally, in an incredibly fine-tuned balance. So if the sun had been too hot or too bright or not bright enough, none of that would have happened. Okay, so why don't we end here, and we'll pick this up again on the end of day 5 in God's creative activity. We'll pick it up again next session. So thanks very much.